Shabbat Shalom. For those who may read my words or view a recording of the service at a future moment in time, I'm standing here in testimony of my experiences lived while on a 5-day solidarity mission in Israel from December 9th to the 14th. Together with 6 others from the American Conference of Cantors, we were determined to respond to crisis in Israel with open hearts and intentional action. Each of us on the mission have a unique and personal relationship with Israel. But in spite of any discernible differences we may have, we were united in our need to be there, to experience with our own senses just a fraction of what a country might be feeling, and to understand so we might better advocate for Israel actively in a state of war. Prior to October 7, Israel had been experiencing political divisions and uprising that had brought millions of Israelis to their streets in protest. My phone alerts were already on update overload, and the next days would, according to Honest Reporting's Gil Hoffman, quote, force Israel's painfully open wounds to be hastily sewn together out of necessity for survival. People who stood across the street from each other, shaking their fists in opposition, were quite literally jumping on grenades to save that same neighbor. And stories are emerging from firsthand testimonies of survivors that demonstrate how, for the moment, regardless of faith or denomination or political persuasion, they are Klal Yisrael. To be clear, the very day after all hostages are released and the last soldiers have hung up their weapons, the efforts to oust the current administration will resume. But for right now, there is important work to be done to bring all hostages home and to encourage the state of Israel to act in preservation of all life. Upon landing in the afternoon of Sunday the 10th, we were taken to our hotel in Jerusalem, where we are staying with many guests who were displaced because of war. The lobby lounges have become a grand central station of activity where families gather to play sheshbesh, which is like backgammon, or gin, where children and their family pets are trying to make sense of these new surroundings, and where the wrinkled older faces, North African or Arabian, who have known pain of the past, are sitting and telling their stories. In addition to the devastation of hardest hit areas along the Gaza envelope, there are nearly 250,000 Israelis, including from cities evacuated in the north, who are sleeping in cities far from their own homes out of extreme caution. After 1 hour of freshening up, we are taken to meet with a young man, Adir Schwartz. Up until October 6th, Adir was gathering steam for the October 31st elections. But when elections were postponed, pivoted into creating the Jerusalem Civilian Command Center to attempt to solve the problems that large groups of displaced populations face. For example, if you are forced to leave your home and you take medication that requires refrigeration that your temporary housing does not provide, you may need a mini fridge delivered. For over 2 months, a portion of the Sam Spiegel Film School complex has been donated for usage and transformed into one of 23 Goodwill locations with 4,000 volunteers and a 30-person call center linked to places all around Israel. In addition to storage for food, clothing, and home goods, there is a storefront where none of the items have price tags. Once a week, a beautician visits to provide free hair care. People can receive a card, this card, which can be shown in areas all around Jerusalem where they can receive discounts for free items and with dignity. From there, we went to the Jerusalem Botanical Gardens area to eat dinner and to visit with Captain Nathaniel Stofsky, a 30-year-old master student and IDF reservist, and his wife Zohara, who is a social worker. Very taxed profession right now by profession. Captain Stofsky is part of COGAT, C-O-G-A-T, the Coordination of Government Activities in the Territories. COGAT is a unit that operates on vital intelligence obtained firsthand by soldiers on the ground who determine if a site has been accurately marked as a place where Hamas is operating as command, storage, or waypoint centers, and will prevent the people in and around the site from being errantly harmed. In spite of public opinion on how Israel is bombing or shelling, every single shell that is launched must be approved for fire by the chief of staff. In addition to obtaining intelligence, they will also help coordinate secure roadways for Palestinian civilians to escape the North Gaza theater, to ensure that humanitarian aid reach their intended delivery sites, and recognize and preserve humanity in the most inhumane place. After much-needed sleep, we woke early to partake of the fantastic Israeli hotel breakfast and make our way into the Gaza envelope. Zimrat is a religious moshav, which is a communal farm with slightly more individualism than a kibbutz, where they contribute to Israel's goals to be self-sustaining by growing many products, including the eggplants and torch peppers we would be handling. Their workforce is made up of Thai workers and Palestinians who prior to October 7 were legally granted access from Gaza. Since the attacks on October 7, the majority of their residents and Asian workers have fled, and their Gazan workers are no longer welcome. But their fields and greenhouses are still yielding fruit due to the generosity of visiting helpers such as our group. There are Sukkot still standing where residents had left them, and their orange and pomegranate trees are ungleaned and rotting. We met 67-year-old Danielle and 69-year-old David Cohen, who along with their 91-year-old mother and other siblings have lived at Zimrat since its founding in 1957 by Tunisian Jews. Their mother is currently living far from Zimrat, near other children in Ramat Gan, where another son, Yisachar, is recovering from having lost a leg from a Qassam missile strike. Daniel instructed us how to tie twine around the base of the eggplants, where there are joints in the stalk so they can better grow vertically with extra support. For 3 hours, I hunched over eggplants and listened to the cacophonous sound of dogs barking, confused roosters crowing, and of course the military operations taking place little more than 3 miles away over the border. It was an odd juxtaposition of working the fertile soil with my own hands and knowing that there were acts of destruction and horror taking place, as if some war movie had been left on way too loud in the other room. Standing under the shade of the plastic greenhouse, we would occasionally step outside to get cooler air and see the rising clouds of smoke from Jabalia or Beit Hanun in Gaza. We were instructed that many outside of the Yotef are given 60 to 90 seconds of warning in a rocket attack, but we would only get 15 seconds and would need to simply lie down and cover our heads. I made a deal with myself that I would not react until I saw our guard, Roni, taking action. So I continued to play in the dirt. We finished our field work and made our way further east to a rest stop near Beit Kama for lunch. We purchased toys and gifts for our upcoming visit with the Bedouin community of Al-Ziyadna. The purpose of the visit was to meet with Bilal and Aisha Al-Ziyadni, who were released from Hamas captivity just weeks prior. Their cousin, who was a physician by trade and who spoke the most English, was their spokesperson and helped explain that they could not discuss many of the sensitive details of their capture due to the reality that their father and cousin are still being held hostage. My seat happened to be directly next to Bilal, and the tension and stress was still present on his body. Hamas took hostages irrespective of religion, nationality, or age, and in spite of Bilal's family efforts to drive people away from the Nova Music Festival area, they were captured. We left and once again drove eastward, returning to the actual grounds of the Nova Festival, and observed the makeshift memorial set up there by relatives and friends. We sang Oseh Shalom and a popular version of Psalm 121, and of course cried with soldiers and civilians alike who came to offer their prayers. Getting back in the van, we drove a very short distance to one of the soldier comfort zones established in a nearby forest of Shokedah. In a matter of minutes, we are lighting Hanukkah candles and singing songs with soldiers and the Cohen family who donate their time and effort to feed over 1,000 meals daily for platoons going in and out of Gaza. We bought 3 flats of fresh sufganiyot, jelly donuts, and 8 vegetable soup prepared by Sammy, and sang songs by popular Israeli artists, which brought a lot of joy to an odd place to meet. American cantors singing with a choir of Israeli soldiers and the artillery booms every so often. We returned to Jerusalem for the night, and while everyone else had plans to go out, I went straight to bed. Waking up on December 12th is always special, as it is my birthday. I did not expect any fanfare, and certainly the Facebook love had already started rolling in. Our first significant meeting of the day was with Gil Hoffman, the CEO of Honest Reporting, one of the most important media watchdogs in the world. It was an opportunity to ask questions concerning the effectiveness of a government sitting on a house of cards. We know that there are many things that a Netanyahu government will have to answer for, and not the least of all, its silence, both during the attack on October 7 and the hours and even into the next day. It is good to have this kind of access to clear and accurate information from Gil and those like him. We got on the road and started towards Ramat Gan and the Shifa Hospital Complex, Tal HaShomrim Center that handles the majority of wounded soldiers' needs as they return to health. Our goal was to deliver cards drawn by religious school children and, of course, to sing for them. And so we gathered in the beautiful open atrium and sang. Gradually, a small crowd formed, and patients were being pushed by their nurses and attendants at their request to join in. It didn't matter if the patients were religious or secular, young or old, every voice that joined was well met. A 97-year-old Holocaust survivor requested some Yiddish, and we obliged. From there, we went to visit rooms in even smaller groups. I met a soldier who had been thrown from his tank and sustained some bruises and a fractured ankle. He happened to have his violin with him, and I could see the sadness in his eyes when we needed to move on. His visiting family were grateful that American cantors and their communities had not abandoned them. After the hospital, we drove to meet with Rabbi Naomi Efrat, a rabbi of Kehilat Halev and coordinator within the Israeli Movement for Progressive Judaism. It was an important reminder that the other issues within Israel have not magically disappeared because of war. There is still a community of progressive Jews who live in Israel and who are made to feel somehow less from the perspective of religious authority and are therefore given little access to resources the government can and should provide. Our concern this day was for their current spiritual and emotional needs, and our message was strong as we delivered much-needed dry goods and clothing to Rabbi Efrat to distribute to a group of soldiers she knows was desperately in need. Next stop was a very special place, tucked into the eastern foothills of the Carmel. Once a kibbutz, Kfar Tikva is a home for more than 200 Israelis ranging in ages from 18 to 90, with moderate to advanced special needs. More than 200 apply each year, and about 10 new residents are accepted. They live in conditions ranging from independent to monitored, and they are given purpose in community and dignity through employment in many local businesses, including a winery, animal farm, and arts and crafts. During war, populations such as these are often overlooked, but their depth and sensitivity and capacity to show love and sympathy should never be forsaken. For example, upon learning of the death of a relative from one of the coordinators, unrelated to the current conflict, the entire community gave hugs and offered words of consolation that were profound and meaningful in every sense. We visited with them, sang songs, lit Hanukkah candles. They did not want to stop, and after we used all the allotted time, they stayed around and requested song after song, delighted that we knew many of what they were requesting. Love flows both ways when it is given in this way. The day continued on as we made our way to Eden Inn in Zichron Yaakov. Once again, we lit candles with families and danced and sang a bit. One side of a dining hall, there was a prepared dinner, fairly Yemenite in nature, malawach, jachnun, other things familiar even to Ashkenazi stomachs. On the other side of the hall, the assembled Ethiopian community was sharing their meal of injera and spice-stewed lentils and vegetables. I wasn't eating a thing, as I preferred to sit with a young Ethiopian girl who had a specific request of country music, American country music. The time was all too short, and we made our way back to Haifa and our hotel for the night. It being my birthday, I decided against better judgment to go out to a nearby bar for a quick toast to my health. I had no intention of staying long, but because my Hebrew courage increases in bars, I jumped into a complex conversation about whiskey and made a new friend who happened to know a great deal about it, as he leads a whiskey academy as a side hustle. Giddy, his name was Giddy, was very moved by what we were doing in the country, and I only wished I were able to take his course. I share this part of my day because it highlights how Israel can be defined by more than bombs or war zones or courts of public opinions. The incredibly diverse population, and where an economist and whiskey lover can find an American Cantor in a bar and remind each other that power of connection. The final day in Israel, we woke early to head out for a drive south on Kfish HaChof, Route 2, towards Kibbutz Shafayim, where the entire surviving population of Kibbutz Kfar Aza is being housed. We met with Kibbutz member Chen Amlas, who told us her incredible story of resistance and strength in those moments of confusion and terror. It's a long story to share, but I will summarize by saying that it is now her personal mission to continue to bring awareness to Kfar Aza, one of the communities most directly affected by Hamas and in need of our collective strength. It is also her home, and while many people will be visiting and will want to see out of curiosity and in memorial, it is up to her and others from her community to shepherd this pain and to decide if they are able to continue life in familiar ways. When I say I stand with Israel, I'm standing with Chen and others like her who need our support. And believe it, we all needed a hug that day. We arrived in Tel Aviv for free time at Templar Colony. It's a massive open-air square built by the Knights Templar and restored as a pedestrian walkway and shops. I met with my childhood friend, Michael Harpaz, who has enjoyed some notoriety and fame in Israel's music industry, and for a moment, everything became very personal, as I was able to hug my friend and confirm for just that moment that he was safe. He is but one of the many people I hold in my prayers. We walked over to the hostages and missing families forum offices to visit with family members of hostages and an important reminder of how our focus needs to return towards locating and freeing hostages. Many of the promotional posters, t-shirts, dog tags, and other items come from their work. There is a team of people who work 24/7 to bring both awareness and resource towards bringing them all home now. After hearing from both family members and dedicated volunteers, we walked over to Hostage Square for one of our longest and most moving musical offerings as a group. Hostage Square is a fairly large space reserved outside the Tel Aviv Museum of Arts complex, where many moving art installations are meant to evoke dialogue and awareness. There are public spaces to contemplate and spaces to join in song or prayer. There are spaces where some family members have chosen to camp out until there is more resolution. And there are also many who simply come to be together in their pain. I will say that singing helped the performers as much as it may have helped the listeners. We had many people spontaneously joining with us. We left Hostage Square for a final meal in Jaffa, where I did get my birthday cake, as well as one final Hanukkah lighting with the Reform communities of Tel Aviv and Jaffa. It is precisely this example of dedication to life and to light that we needed to be with, even for just that brief moment of our time. From the port of Jaffa, we headed towards Lod and Ben Gurion International Airport. We are 7 Cantors with very different journeys that led us to the Cantorate, but forever united in our steps moving forward in support of Israel. It changed all of us. I've been back in the United States for little more than 2 weeks, and in many ways, I'm still in Israel. My conviction towards the existence of a Jewish state has not wavered, and I have only increased my desire to bring more attention towards freeing the hostages. At the same time, I hope to share the most accurate, real-time information regarding the necessary use of force and how we must continue to find and elevate humanity in places where there seems to be an absence of it. Am Yisrael Chai, the nation of Israel lives, not simply as an idea or an experiment, but for the sake of its people. Shabbat Shalom.